hello. A little music while we wait for y'all to come. Wednesday night, July 29th, and Milton Davis here. The music that you hear in the background is Zeke's Countryman Dub by Otis Galloway. It's an original song written for Zeke Culpepper from our Steampunk stories from here to Timbuktu. Hey Jocelyn, how you doing? Gonna give it a few minutes and see if we can get a game in the group here. Trying to see if I can pull you guys up on my phone as well, because sometimes I have a problem with the seeing the comments. Let's see. Hope everybody's staying safe and staying healthy. Let the music play out, and once the song goes off, we'll get things going in. Turn it down a little bit. I don't want to blast y'all out a little bit here. Apologize for the close-up. Hey, Miss Anna, how you doing? Oops, didn't mean to do that. Yeah, they are, Joshua. I see a few of them, and the next thing you know, I don't see anything. So I'm trying to get my phone hooked up here so I can see what's going on here. Nope, don't want to do that. Let's see, Milton Davis. Apparently I can't see myself live, so I might have to wing it on you guys with the comment section. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope they're staying safe and staying healthy. Let's see. Can I watch Milton Davis here? Nope, that's not working either. Oh well. We'll give everybody a little bit longer, about a minute and a half. No, this is also streaming on the event section as well. So if you signed up for the events, you can see this streaming on the event as well. So I did a connected thing. It's my first time doing that, so I don't know how it's going to work. So if you're looking at me through that, then, you know. So Dedrin Sneed is in the house. What's up, Dedrin? How you doing, man? Once again, the music that you're hearing in the background is original music created by Otis Galloway. It's called Zeke's Countryman Dub. If you're familiar with my steampunk stories from here to Timbuktu, you'll know that Zeke Culpepper is the main character, one of the main characters in that series. I'm trying to keep from bobbing to this music. So. Pull this thing up on my phone. We're gonna try to keep up with the comments on the desktop. Got a few more seconds, and I'm gonna have to fade the music out on you. And there we go. Okay, everybody. It's 8:05, 8:06 actually. So I want to get started tonight. For those of you who don't know, my name is Milton Davis. I am author and owner of MV Media LLC, a company that specializes in science fiction and fantasy based on African American culture and tradition. Tonight, I'm going to be reading a story called Ambush at Cold River. It is a story that contains the character, not the character, but the person, Bass Reeves, although it is a fictional story. This story came about because of a gentleman by the name of Ron Fortier. Ron Fortier owns a company called Airship 27, and Ron is a very big fan of Bass Reeves. For those of you who don't know, Bass Reeves was a U.S. Marshal in the 19th century, served in the Oklahoma Territory, was a fantastic person, an amazing U.S. Marshal. If you haven't had a chance to look him up, please take a chance to look him up and learn about his history. I actually posted a link in the events section that tells you a little bit about Bass Reeves. But to give you some background on this story, Ron is a big fan of Bass Reeves and decided to do a series of fictional anthologies that had fictional stories about Bass Reeves. Actually, I have a copy of the first book. This is it right here. It's Bass Reeves Frontier Marshal. It's actually 3 editions of this book. This is volume 1. My story, Ambush at Cold River, is actually in volume 2. And there's also a volume 3. And he's got authors such as Derek Ferguson, Andrew Salmon, Gary Phillips, Mel Odoms. And all these stories are great stories using Bass Reeves as a main character in each one. But if you know Bass Reeves, his real life would make a fantastic book in itself and a fantastic movie in itself. And hopefully one day we'll see that on the screen. There has been some independent movies made, some indie movies made about him, but nothing really on the major screen. I think the closest we came to seeing Bass Reeves was seeing the character in the Magnificent Seven that Denzel Washington played, and that character's appearance was almost Bass Reeves to a T, with the exception of the name. So Ambush at Cold River actually did not start off as a Bass Reeves story. It was actually a story that was inspired by an image by Mervyn Candau, also known as Mervyn Loves ZBrush, and he had a picture called Quick Shot Katie, and it was a picture of a black woman cowboy. And I saw the picture and I was like, oh man, this is great. So I said, I want to write a story based on this. So I talked to Mervyn. He said, hey, yeah, go for it. So as I was writing this story, Ron got in contact with me and said, hey, I got the volume 2 coming out of Bass Reeves, and I want to know if you could contribute a story. And I said, well, I got this story that I'm working on right now, and what I can do is actually incorporate Bass Reeves into this story. So in the particular volume, my story is probably the only story where Bass Reeves is not the main character. He comes in as one of the characters, but he's not the main character. The story is really about Quick Shot Katie and this particular situation that she ran into. So without further ado, I will get started and read to you guys Ambush at Cold River. Katie Calhoun rode into Felicity, slumped in her saddle and covered with trail dust. The ride to the quiet town had been more arduous than normal due to the drought hanging over the valley like a buzzard over a ripe carcass. She wasn't much on towns or cities, preferring her solitude, but the lack of good hunting and a weak harvest forced her into town to buy supplies and possibly find work. The latter was more dream than reality. Few were willing to hire a woman for what was considered men's work, and fewer still a Negro woman. She guided her horse down the ill-kept streets to the hitching post before the general store. As she walked toward the door, she saw a sight almost as rare as her in the town, A Negro man wearing a preacher's collar standing before the store counter. Billy Darden, the store owner, looked up at the tall man with an expression of disgust. Now look here, boy, he said. I done already told you I ain't got none of the supplies you looking for. The man sighed. Sir, I got a wagon train of 100 people depending on me to bring those supplies back. Now I can clearly see that you have everything I need. I'm appealing to your Christian faith to help us out in this time of need. I got the gold right here. All I need is for you to treat us fair and square. That's all. Billy took his shotgun from under the counter. Look, boy, this is the last time I'm telling you. Get out of my store before they have to drag you out. The Negro preacher raised his hand. Ain't no need for violence, sir, he said. I'll be moving on. God bless you. Katie stepped to the side, then turned her back as the preacher exited the store, dropping a piece of paper as he went to his horse. He mounted, then stared at the store. This place ain't no better than Mississippi, he said. Lord, how far we got to go to get away from this evil? He spurred his horse and galloped down the road. Katie picked up the paper. It was a list of the supplies the preacher tried to buy. She strode into the store, removing her scarf to reveal her face. Billy looked up and then smiled. Well, well, if it ain't Katie Calhoun. What brings you to Felicity? Crops went bad, Katie said. Gonna need some supplies to get me through the winter. What do you need? Katie reached into her jacket and pulled out her list. Billy studied the list and nodded. No problem, he said. I'll be needing this too. For a friend, Katie said. Katie placed the preacher's list on the counter. Billy looked at the list and scowled. Now wait just a goddamn minute. Katie pulled back her jacket, revealing her ivory-handled six-shooter. Billy, we've known each other for a long time, she said. Now I can't say we're friends, but I'm sure we're not enemies. But we're going to be if you don't fill out both those orders. You know good and well what happens to my enemies. Billy stomped back into the storage room, bringing the supplies and stacking them on the counter. I'm going to need a mule and a wagon too, Katie said. Mike, Billy shouted. Mike Stanton, Billy's nephew, stuck his head into the door. Yeah, Uncle Billy? Go round back and get Katie here a mule and wagon. Yes, sir. The boy smiled at Katie. Hiya, quick shot, he said. You sure looking pretty today. Get on now, boy, Billy said. Katie and Billy glared at each other as Mike brought around the wagon and then loaded it with the supplies. Katie paid the full amount. Good doing business with you, she said. Don't ever come back here again, Billy replied. Oh, I'll be back, Katie said, and you'll give me what I pay for. Otherwise, little Mike here'll be running this store. Katie turned her back on Billy and went to her horse. She tied it to the wagon and climbed inside. All right, preacher man, she whispered. Let's get you your supplies. Katie pushed the mule hard. The preacher had a good head start and was riding with less weight. But Katie had a good idea where to find him in the wagon train. There were very few places along the North Road where a group as big as the preachers described could camp, and without supplies they would have to scrounge the grass for wild game. She cracked her whip and the mule bayed in protest. I ain't got no time for back talk, mule, she shouted. Get us where we need to be and you won't have to worry about old Katie. Katie and the mule crested the hill above Shamus Creek an hour before dusk. The preacher's wagon train was scattered on both sides of the shallow creek. The folks had cleared a spot near the creek and filled it with cooking fires. A man sitting on a roan stallion and sporting a Union jacket and cap spotted her first. He whistled, then rode toward her. The others emerged from the wagons and gathered close to the fires. The man cradled a Sharp's rifle against his chest, holding the reins in his right hand. A thick mustache drooped around his mouth. Katie smiled as his eyebrows rolled. Well, you're quite a sight, he said, his southern drawl thick like her parents. Last time I expected to see somebody way out here was a Negro woman alone. Last thing I expected to see out here was a wagon train of Negroes, Katie said. My name is Katie Calhoun, and I've got something for the preacher. The man tipped his hat. Jason Jones, he said. Folks call me Jay. Reverend Steels is in the camp. You best follow me. Jay and Katie entered the camp. The curious folks immediately surrounded the wagon, their expressions ranging from joy to suspicion. "Hey, Reverend," Jay shouted. "Someone's here to see you." The Reverend stuck his head out of the wagon near the fire, a puzzled look on his face. He climbed out and was quickly followed by a petite, light-skinned woman who glared at Katie suspiciously. Katie snickered as she climbed out the wagon. Looked like the Reverend was going to have some explaining to do. "Reverend, this young lady says she has something for you," Jay said with a smirk. "I couldn't imagine what," the Reverend said. "I've never seen her before in my life." Katie could tell the Reverend uttered those words more for his wife than for anything else. "No, Reverend, you never met me," Katie said. "I saw you back in Felicity trying to buy supplies. You walked right by me on your way out. You had good reason not to notice me." She walked to the wagon and pulled back the canvas. "I think this is what you went in town for." The Reverend's eyes widened at the sight of the supplies. "Everybody gather around," he shouted. "The Lord has provided." The people rushed to the wagon and cheered. They immediately grabbed each other's hands, forming a human circle. Katie held the Reverend's wife's hand on the right and Jay's on the left. The Reverend stood in the middle of the circle. "Let us bow our heads," he began. "Dear Lord, thank you for blessing us with this bounty. Our journey has been filled with trials and tribulations, but you still have not abandoned your children. Once again, you sent one of your angels to watch over us. In the everlasting name of Jesus Christ, amen." "Amen," the other said. Katie placed her hands on her hips. "Now that's a first," she said. "I've never been called an angel before." "But you are," the Reverend wife said. "I'm Precious Steele, Reverend Steele's wife." "Glad to meet you," Katie said. She pushed past Precious to the Reverend. "Those supplies cost me $5, she said. "Oh, of course," the Reverend replied. "Precious, please go into the wagon and bring $5 for Katie Calhoun." "Miss Calhoun," he finished. Katie tipped her hat. "Much obliged to you." "Thank you again, Miss Calhoun," the Reverend said. "It seems the evil of some people continues to follow us." "Felicity ain't one of the friendliest towns in these parts," she said, "especially when it comes to Negroes." "Yet he sold supplies to you," the Reverend replied. "I'm known around these parts," she said. "Besides, I can be very persuasive when I have to be." Katie patted her guns. The Reverend's eyes widened. "Lord Jesus, I hope you didn't have to kill anyone." Katie laughed. "Not this time." The Reverend frowned. "The taking of life is nothing to joke about." Katie's smile faded. "I ain't joking." Miss Steele appeared and broke the tension. "Here you are, ma'am," she said. $5. Katie counted out the money, then grinned. "Looks like our business is done. I'll be getting along now." "No, please stay and have supper with us," Miss Steele said. "Yes, please do," the Reverend agreed. "It's almost dark and we'd love to have your company. Besides, if it wasn't for you, supper would be a little sparse." Jay walked up and stood beside her. "Yeah, Katie, you should stay." Jay had that sly smile on his face that men displayed when food was the last thing on their mind. Katie smiled back. "I think I will," she said. "No way I'll make it back to town before dark, and I'm not too fond of sleeping by myself tonight." Jay's smile widened. "That would be unsafe." "Good," Precious said. She grabbed Katie by the hand as she scowled at Jay. "You can help us women prepare the meal." "I'm not much of a cook," Katie said. "That's okay. The rest of us will make up for your shortcomings. Come on now." Katie gave Jay a "I'm sorry" glance and followed Precious and the other women to help prepare supper. She took the easiest task, peeling potatoes, while the others cut and chopped and seasoned the provisions she brought from the general store. Precious was in command, shouting orders to the other women while talking to Katie between shouts. "It's not good for a young lady like yourself to be living alone in such a wild place," she said. "I'm doing all right," Katie replied. "Seem to remember I wasn't the one about to starve without food." Precious cut a mean glance at Katie. "Still, you never know when a man might try to take advantage of your innocence." "You don't know who you're talking to," Katie said. "I ain't one of your church girls. I've been living in this territory for over 10 years and ain't no man ever got anything from me unless I wanted to give it. And those who try are keeping company with the devil in hell. Katie patted her sidearm. The other ladies laughed. Precious glared at them and they fell silent. You talk as bad as the men folk, Precious said. Sometimes I'm as bad as them, Katie replied. Look, Miss Steele, I appreciate your concern, but my mama died a long time ago and I ain't looking for another one. How about you staying out my business and let's enjoy this good supper y'all ladies are preparing? Besides, Jay ain't my type. Too bow-legged. Man looked like he got rickets or something. Precious didn't have too much to say to Katie after the conversation. The supper was delicious. Katie never could have imagined so much being done with so little. After dinner, she sat at the fire, captivating the wagon train folks with stories of growing up in Oklahoma territory. She spent the night sleeping by Reverend's wagon, much to Jay's disappointment. She wasn't lying when she told Precious Jay wasn't her type. That never stopped her before from taking a man for a role, but being in the camp with so many religious folks dampened any desire she might have for the ex-Union soldier. She was up at the daylight, inspecting the wagon before her ride back to town. Leaving so early? The Reverend asked. Yes, sir, Katie replied. Got to get this wagon back and get on my way. Thank you kindly for supper last night. I'll be praying that you and your people get to your land without any more trouble. Katie was climbing into the wagon as Jay rode up. I can follow you a ways and make sure you're safe, he said. Katie laughed. I've been safe all this time before I met you. I think I'll be all right. You look out for them folks, okay? Jay tipped his hat with a smile. Katie took her time getting the wagon back to Felicity. By the time she reached town, the sun was setting. As she took the wagon around back, she noticed a large amount of horses hitched in front of the saloon. Some were familiar, others were definitely from out of town. Mike Stanton was sitting beside the store whittling when Katie arrived. He jumped to his feet, dropping the wood and folding his knife and shoving it into his pocket. Howdy, Miss Katie, he said as he waved. Hi, Mike. Katie climbed from the wagon. You take good care of my ponies? Mike poked his chest out as he grabbed his suspenders. Yes, ma'am. Katie took a silver dollar out of her pocket and flipped it to the boy. Mike snatched it out of the air, a wide grin on his freckled face. Thank you, Miss Katie. Katie motioned her head toward the saloon. What's going on in there? 3 men rode into town from Mississippi yesterday, Mike said. They say they're looking for some Negroes that stole some property from them. They're gathering up a posse to go after them. Katie felt a surge of anger. She reached into her pocket and pulled out another silver dollar. I'll give you another one of these if you go inside and unlatch the back door. You got it, Miss Katie. Katie tossed Mike another coin. He caught it, shoved it in his pocket, grabbed his hat, and sprinted into the saloon. Katie took a more leisurely pace, making sure no one was looking when she slipped around the alley between the saloon and the livery, then trotted to the rear of the building. She waited until the door opened. Mike stuck out his head and smiled. Katie ran to the door. You go on now, Mike, she said, and keep quiet about this. I will, ma'am, he said. Katie followed Mike to the saloon bar area. He walked through the door but didn't close it all the way. Katie peeked inside. The saloon was filled with men. A few of them wanted criminals. Standing before the bar were 3 men dressed Eastern style with expensive felt hats on their heads. The bartender leaned on the bar, listening to the men as well. These Negroes purchased land with our stolen money and plan on selling on it. As I see it, since it was my money, that land belongs to me. So in addition to the pay, I'll grant a plot of land to any one of y'all that wants it, up to the limit available. One of the listeners spoke up. I've been wanting to take up farming myself. I guess this would be a right time to do it. I'm in. Another man spoke up. I ain't interested in no farm. Give me the money and I'll be fine. Been a while since I've been coon hunting. A round of laughter spread through the room. That makes 15, the man beside the speaker said. That's all we can afford. Then I guess we have our posse, the central man replied. Meet us in front of the saloon in 3 days. We'll ride to Cold River Forge like Billy here suggested and set up the ambush. Katie had heard enough. She hurried out the back of the saloon. To her pleasant surprise, Mike was waiting with her ponies. I figured you'd be needing these, he said. Katie scrambled onto her roan mare. She tossed Mike another dollar. I hope you can help them folks, Mike said. They ain't done nothing to nobody. I damn sure plan to, Katie replied, even if I have to die trying. But first I'm going to need some help, and I know just where to find it. She spurred her horse and galloped out of town. Katie rode hard, stopping only at sundown. She was back up the next morning, keeping a hard pace until she saw the wagon train in the distance. She switched to a fresh horse, then left the other behind as she galloped ahead. The wagon train folks smiled and waved at her as she rode to the lead wagon. Reverend Steels and Precious sat on the buckboard of their Conestoga. Jason rode his horse leading the way, his sharp rifle lying across his saddle. They smiled when they recognized her. Miss Calhoun, the Reverend said, so you've decided to join us after all. Not exactly, Katie replied. I've come to bring you some bad news. The smiles faded from their faces. Jason guided his horse closer to Katie. Them folks you left in Mississippi are here, and they're looking for you, Katie said. Oh, my Lord, Precious exclaimed. The Reverend patted his wife on the shoulder. Don't fret, Precious. We're in the hands of the Almighty. I don't know about the Lord's hands, but you're sure enough in mine, Katie replied. You're going to have to get off this trail. It'll lead you right to the ambush they're planning to set up. We can't do that, Jason said. The best place to ford Cold River is the way we're headed. You ain't fording the river, not anytime soon. Katie tipped back her hat and leaned forward on her saddle horn. Reverend, you're going to ride up to the next clearing and make camp. Don't leave that place until me and Jay return. Jay looked puzzled. Return? Where are we going? Katie grinned. We're going to ruin a surprise, but we have to make a stop first. What stop? The two of us ain't enough, Katie replied. I'm sure of what I can do, but I'm not sure about what you can do. No offense. None taken, Jay said. We need one more person, and I know exactly where he is. How do you know he'll help? Jay asked. He'll help all right, Katie replied. He owes me. Bass Reeves swung his axe downward, splitting the wood with one stroke. Chopping wood was the order of the day. It would be winter soon, and there was never enough. He took the split lumber, then added it to the growing stack, and then balanced another piece on the chopping block. He was raising his axe when he spied two riders approaching. He dropped the axe, then strolled to the front porch of his modest home, picking up the Winchester propped against the side of the house. As the most successful U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma Territory, he was bound to have some enemies hunting him down. As the riders neared, a grin lifted his wide mustache. Well, I'll be damned, he said to himself. Quick shot Katie. He relaxed a bit, but not completely. He didn't recognize the man riding with Katie, so it was best to retain a little wariness. Katie was a petty criminal at the least, a vigilante at the most. A few local lawmen might have issue with her, but there was nothing she'd ever done that would put her on the wrong side of U.S. law. He'd known her parents, escaped slaves just like him hide in the untamed territory. He watched her grow up into the woman she was, though he had to admit he was a bit disappointed how she turned out. A hard life in a hard land can twist a person in different ways. When her face came into full view, Bass could tell there was something amiss. He stood straight, then tipped his hat. Katie, he said, what brings you to my doorstep? I need your help, Bass, Katie replied. Got a wagon train of Negroes from Mississippi about to be ambushed by a posse claiming they're thieves. Maybe they are, Bass replied. No, they ain't, sir, the man with the Union cap said. And who might you be? Bass asked. Jason Jones, formerly of the 54th Massachusetts, the man said. Sharpshooter. That don't mean a thing to me, Bass replied. I ain't got no time for your suspicions, Katie interjected. If we don't ride out right now, these folks are going to die. You know my word is good. Besides, there are a couple of boys riding with that posse that you got warrants on. So are you coming or ain't you? Give me a minute, Bass said. Bass went inside his house to gather the tools of his trade. He strapped on his sidearms and packed a change of clothes, ammunition, and provisions into 2 saddlebags. He locked up the house and ambled to the barn for his horses. Chopping wood would have to wait. He mounted his mare, then wrapped his reins the reins of his stallions around his shoehorn. Ready to travel, he rode his horse up to Katie. Where we headed? The ford at Cold River, Katie replied. Good place for an ambush, Bass said. Katie grinned. Yes, it is. Bass frowned again. Now, Katie, if there are fugitives in the posse like you said, I need to take them alive. You know I ain't for no unnecessary killing. You ain't got to worry about me as long as you handle your business properly, Katie replied. That's why I came to fetch you. I figured the sight of a little law and order might make them back down. But if they start shooting, I'm going to shoot back. And you know I don't often miss. Neither do I, Jay said. Bass shook his head. Fair enough. Let's ride. The trio pushed hard through the Oklahoma landscape, finally arriving at Cold River Ford at dusk. As Katie said, it was the perfect place for an ambush. This section of the river ran through a shallow valley bordered by wooded hills. The road leading to the ford was wooded as well, providing shade for a wagon train, or in this case, hiding places for those of ill intent. Bass raised his hand as they reached the summit of the hill overlooking the river. We'll camp out here, he said. No fire. We'll let that posse move in and set up before we move in. They'll set their own trap and we'll bag them, Katie said. Not exactly, Bass replied. What are you talking about, Jay said. He looked at Katie. What is he talking about? As a U.S. Marshal, I'm required to give a man a chance to surrender before attempting to arrest him by force, Bass said. Ain't no such damn thing, Katie replied. Wanted dead or alive. That's what the posters say. I want them alive, Bass replied. If you want my help, that's the way it's got to be. Jay rode up to Bass. His face was not pleasant. Mister, did you fight in the war? I was a slave, Bass replied. Went to the war to serve my master. One day we got into a disagreement over a card game and I whooped him good. Been wanting to do it for quite some time. Of course, after that I had to run. That's how I ended up in Oklahoma. Jay's mood seemed to calm a bit after Bass' words. Then you know what kind of folks we're dealing with, Jay said. Every time I marched into battle, I knew them damn graybacks were either going to kill me on the spot or send me back to slavery, so I fought like a wildcat. I didn't ask for no quarter, and I didn't give it. The 3 men coming after these folks were all graybacks. Hell, the leader was an officer. Going to be hard for me not to put a bullet in them. As far as we know, they ain't broke no laws, Bass said. If they cooperate, we'll let them be and send them on their way. If they don't, then you'll get your chance. Jay nodded. Fair enough. They rode their horses to the spot Bass chose, then set up camp. Katie rolled out her blanket in a soft spot, then went immediately to sleep. Bass stretched out as well, pulling his hat down over his eyes to get himself a bit of rest. How'd you become a U.S. Marshal? Jay asked. Bass frowned. Seemed he wouldn't get much rest after all. After I escaped, I fell in with the local Indians, he said. They taught me how to shoot, track, and live off the land. Learn this land like the back of my hand. Oklahoma was wild back then. A lot of lawbreakers and deserters would come and lay low on the account that the government didn't have much jurisdiction here. Shoot, it's wild now, Jay said. You ain't seen nothing, boy, Bass replied. Because I knew the land so well, the marshals would come by my house to help them find whoever was hiding out. After a while, they decided to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They asked me if I wanted to be a marshal. The pay was good and the work was steady, so I said yes. Bass lifted his hat high enough to see Jay's serious face. What about you? Why'd you decide to come out this way? Jay pulled a grass stalk and chewed on it. Wasn't no way I was going to stay down south after the federal troops left, he said. I escaped with Moses before the war. When it finally broke out, I was eager to fight. Had family I wanted to see free, and I always felt bad leaving them. It was a joyful day when they finally let us Negroes fight. Jay took the stalk from his lips. I ain't know war was going to be like it was. I saw some things a man wasn't supposed to see. I still see them sometimes. Lots of boys run off, black and white. But I promised to see it through, and I did. You find your family? Most of them, Jay answered. Some of them had already run off before the war was over. If they were smart, they went up north, or they came out here. I was one of them stupid enough to stay down south. I thought things were going to be better, and they were for a time. But then the soldiers left and the Klan started riding and it was hell all over again. But like I said the last time, I wasn't taking it. When the Reverend came to me to lead his people out here, he saved my life. I was about to be lynched any minute. Bass sat up, leaning on his right arm. Why was that? Jay lifted his sharps. Like I said, I wasn't taking it. A grin came to Bass's face and he eased back down his blanket and closed his eyes. Got to admire a man who fights for what he believes in, he said. You better get some rest. I suspect that despite my best efforts, you will have some more fighting to do. Jay nodded. I suspect I will. I'll take first watch, Bass replied. Jay laid out on his blanket, then fell asleep. Bass leaned against the nearest tree, then settled in for his watch. He glanced over at Jay and Katie, sadness creeping into his thoughts. Life was hard enough than having to deal with what Negroes had to go through. But things weren't going to change anytime soon. He let that brief moment of pity pass. He was a U.S. Marshal, and he had work to do. Katie touched him on the shoulder and relieved him on his watch. He went off to sleep as she was prone. He went off and slept hard as he was prone to do when on a hunt. He was awakened by Jay's serious face. They're coming, the sharpshooter said. Bass jumped up from the blanket and followed Jay to where Katie crouched. She looked at the two of them and grinned. Looks like they picked up a few folks along the way, she said. I count at least 30 of them. Bass looked at the riders approaching and a bitter taste invaded his mouth. Half of them are just here to watch, he said. They think it's going to be a lynching, Jay replied. Jay laid on the ground and positioned his sharps. Bass put a hand on the barrel. We had an agreement, he said. It's 30 of them, Katie replied. I say we trim the herd before we start negotiating. Bass strolled to his horse. I'm riding ahead. I'll meet them before they cross the river. You two get yourselves in position behind them. And no shooting until I say so. Bass climbed onto his horse, then rode off before Katie and Jacob protest. He worked his way down the hills and onto the trail well ahead of the posse. He coaxed his horses into the shallow river to the opposite bank, then waited. A half an hour later, the first riders of the posse crested the hill. Bass figured their initial intention would be to fan out into the brush and set up an ambush. However, they picked up the pace toward the river. They'd seen him. By the time they reached the opposite bank, the ringleaders had separated themselves from the group. Another man rode with them, a man whose face Bass knew. One of the men, a red-faced fellow with a wide-brimmed hat and bristling mustache, rode forward, accompanied by the fugitive Aaron Wisely. Wisely had a $100 bounty on his head and was as slippery as a greased fish. He tipped his hat back and grinned. I knew it, he said. Bass Reeves. Hello, Marshal Reeves, the other man said. I'm Colonel Wilson Pickett. To what do I owe this meeting? Bass nodded. Colonel Pickett, it has come to my attention that you plan on apprehending a group of settlers bound for land which they purchased. It has also come to my attention that your posse contains a number of men that are wanted for various crimes against the federal government. As a U.S. Marshal, I have to ask you to abandon your pursuit of these innocent people and turn over the fugitives within your group. The colonel grinned. Marshal, those people you claim to be innocent stole from me. The wagons and tools in their possession are items that were loaned to them in order to farm the property I owed under the sharecropping agreements they signed. In my book, that constitutes stealing. If you accuse these folks of theft, then it is an issue you should settle in the court of law, not with an armed posse, Bass replied. And by the look of your group, I get the feeling you're not interested in due process. The colonel's face shifted into a hard facade. Look, boy, he said, I don't care if some damn fool decided to pin a badge on your chest. These damn folks stole from me and broke their contracts. I'm taking every last one of them back to Mississippi. Those that resist can stay here in their graves. Wisely laughed. That's right, nigga. Now get the hell out of here. Bass lowered his head and shook it. I'm sorry you feel that way. When he looked up, he had his revolver in his hand. You're under arrest, he said. All of you. The colonel and Wisely laughed. You actually think you're going to arrest all of us by yourself? Bass grinned. Who said I was by myself? The hell with this, Wisely exclaimed. He went for his gun. Weiser was fast, but Bass was faster. He shot the fugitive in the arm. No sooner did he, no sooner did he do so, a bullet grazed Bass' shoulder, knocking him backwards. The colonel turned and galloped away. Bass heard the report of a sharp's rifle, and the colonel tumbled from his horse. Bedlam ensued. The posse began shooting in every direction while being cut down by Jay's deadly fire. Those who came as spectators fled down the road back to Felicity, yelling and screaming along the way. Bass jumped on his horse and rode across the river, hoping to calm the situation down. As he reached the bank, he saw Katie emerge from the bush, firing her Winchester from the waist. More posse members fell from their horses as she worked her way closer to the group. Posse members began raising their hands in surrender, but Jay and Katie continued to shoot. Bass aimed at Katie and fired. Her hat flew off her head. She turned in his direction, her Winchester at her shoulder. Bass shook his head. Katie frowned and lowered the rifle. She turned and fired 3 quick shots in the air. Soon afterwards, Jay came out of hiding, his Sharp's rifle pointed at the posse. The 3 converged on the group. Bass spied the other fugitives, Billy Wainwright and Will Gunderson. "Everybody drop your guns," Bass shouted. Most of the riders complied. A few held onto them, their looks defiant. Katie raised her rifle. "Drop 'em now, or I start back shooting." "Me too," Jason said. The others dropped their weapons. The men rode up to Bass. He climbed down from his horse and tied the fugitives to their horses. He climbed onto his horse before speaking to the others. "The rest of you get out of here. If I ever see any of you on the wrong side of the law again, I'll make sure you spend the rest of your life in federal prison. Understand?" The other men nodded. Bass looked at Katie and Jay. "Let him go," he said. "Are you serious?" Jay replied. "Yes, let him go." Jay spit before lowering his rifle. The men galloped away over the rise, all except the riders from Mississippi. They rode to the body of the colonel and loaded him onto his horse. They took their time, sharing a dangerous look at the trio. "This ain't over," one of them said. Katie cocked her Winchester. "It can be, right now." Bass maneuvered his horse between Katie and the Mississippi men. "Back down, Katie," he said. "You shoot those men and I have to take you in too." "I don't let folks threaten my life and live," she said. "Simmer down," Bass said. Katie lowered her rifle slightly. "I'll give you a head start," she said. The men rode off as fast as their horses allowed. Katie laughed as she rested her rifle on her shoulder. "I thought I was going to have to take you down," Bass said. "You couldn't have if you wanted to," Katie replied. "Jay wouldn't have let you." "No, I wouldn't have," Jay replied. Bass shook his head as he grinned. "You two ain't the best help I ever had, but you're good enough." He focused his attention on Katie. "You can't go back to Felicity. You know that, right?" Katie shrugged. "Never was my home anyway. Folks there just tolerated me. Everybody except that boy Michael Stanton. Poor kid is sweet on me." Bass watched Katie stroll to the bush, then return on her horse. "I reckon I'll hook up with the Reverend and his people for a while until things cool down," she said. "They could use an extra gun, and Jay could use some company. Ain't that right, Jay?" Jay grinned like a gambler on a winning streak. "Yeah, that's right, Katie." "You two best get on then, and tell the Reverend I wish him good luck," Bass said. "What are you going to do with them two?" Jay asked. "We ain't far from Pembroke," Bass said. "Sheriff Coleman and I are good friends. I have these fellows locked up by nightfall." "Thank you, Bass," Katie said. "You done good for some good people." "Only because you asked," Bass said. Your folks done good raising you. You turned out to be good after all." "Don't let nobody hear you say that," Katie said. "I have a reputation to uphold." She tipped her hat to Bass, then winked at Jason. "Come on, soldier boy," she said. "If we hurry, we can catch up with the others before nightfall." "I'm with you, Katie," Jay replied. Katie grinned. "I know you are." Bass watched them ride off down the trail as he shook his head. "Young folks," he said aloud. He looked at the fugitives and his smile faded. "Let's get you boys to justice," he said. He kicked his mount and the 3 of them crossed Cold River. And that's Ambush at Cold River. I'll give you guys a minute to catch up and see if I can do something with my comments. I'm going to see if I can pull y'all up on my phone. I used to know how to do this, but I don't know now. Let's see. Oh, that's not how you do it. So, I don't think I can do this. Well, like I said, like I told you guys earlier, and again, I apologize because I can't see the comments on my desktop. So, I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up a little bit. But like I said before, there are 3 volumes of Bass Reeves. I'll show you the cover again. Bass Reeves Frontier Marshal. This is book 1. There's also a volume 2 and a volume 3. And all these books are available on Amazon. You get them from Airship 27, which is Ron Fortier's publishing company. I hope you guys enjoyed the story. I'm going to be back next week. I will be reading a Sword and Soul story, actually something from my short story collection called Fallen, which is one of my Shange and Majoga stories, which is a story that was a character that was based on images created by Chris Mosby. So I'll be there. I'll be here next week to read that. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope to talk to you soon. Once I sign off, I will be able to see your comments, and I will answer any comments that are up during that time. So, you guys take care, and I will see you next week.